Hello, and welcome to Off the Fence, a podcast where we deconstruct difficult decision-making to help us understand what keeps us stuck, and more importantly, how do we get unstuck? I'm your host, Karen Covey, a former divorce lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator turned coach, author, and entrepreneur. With me today is Rita Morris, and Rita is a parent, coach, and psychotherapist. She has a master's degree in education, is a certified life coach, and is a licensed mental health counselor. As such, she has been walking through the trenches and struggles of life for the past 20 years. As a coach, Rita's greatest aspiration is to help her clients connect with themselves and their values, allowing them to parent from a place of authenticity and to reclaim the joy of parenting. On the personal side, Rita has a passion for parenting and is the mother of two beautiful daughters herself. She's a Pilates lover, audiobook junkie, an avid crafter, and an even more avid shopper, which may explain why Rita and I get along so well. But anyways, Rita, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Karen. I'm really delighted to be here today.
I am thrilled to have you on the podcast because I think what you have to say can help so many people. And I want to dive right into parent coaching. Can you explain to our listeners, what is that?
So that's a really good question. Parent coaching. So a lot of what I do is co-parent coaching. So helping parents who are somewhere along the spectrum of divorce establish healthy and constructive co-parenting relationships. We work on communication skills. We work on conflict resolution. We work on understanding different parenting styles. So that's the co-parenting piece. The parent coaching, when it's just parent coaching, is really supporting parents in understanding their kids and strengthening their connection to their kids. Because parents come, and oftentimes when they come to me, they're at a loss. They feel like their kids are drowning, their kids are disrespectful, their kids are in trouble, and they just don't know what to do. And, I will say 9 times out of 10, it's really about strengthening the relationship that you have with your kid. Which is so counterintuitive for people. People feel like they need to punish their kids, but it's really not about that.
That is so interesting. So it sounds, first of all, just to be clear, it sounds like you work with all kinds of parents who are in the middle of a divorce and parents who are not, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So when you're working with parents, you said that it's always about strengthening the relationship they have with their kids. I know, especially with teenagers. How do you do that?
This is not an easy task, but really it's about meeting them where they're at. So I can't even tell you, Karen, with my own kids, like how many stupid YouTube videos I've watched with them, or
I can understand.
How many video games I've watched them play. It's meeting them where they're at. Like if they're, my youngest daughter is into ceramics. So tell me about your ceramics project, and just hearing from them what makes them tick. But it's really mostly about meeting them where they're at,
When you say meeting them where they're at, what do you mean? Can you explain that a little?
Yes. So what I mean is figuring out what interests them, figuring out like if you have their friends over and you hear the conversations that they're having, like ask them about those conversations, ask them about their friends, ask them about the things that are important to them in the moment.
So what do you do though as a parent if you don't approve, right? You ask them and you're like, and everything inside of you just clenches. I mean, what would be the best reaction or the best way to react so that you don't like smash the connection you're trying to encourage?
And so I always like to say that neutrality is a parent's best weapon, right? Because typically when we have that response, that's a fear-based response, right? So our kids are telling us something that is like freaking us out. And so we're afraid they're making bad decisions. We're afraid they're going to get hurt. They're afraid they're going to flunk out of school, whatever it is that's coming up for us, right? So the best thing you can do, take a deep breath, sit back and listen. You can like literally be dying inside, But the best thing you can really do is just take a deep breath and listen, hear them out. And then not in a like lecture-y kind of way, but just to remind them like, so, let's talk about some of the choices that you're making. Do you think you're being safe? Do you think you're making good decisions? So much of life is about decision making, right? So teaching our kids from a very young age decision making skills and giving them the opportunity to make bad decisions will then teach them to make good ones.
You are now speaking my language. I mean, that's what this podcast is all about, is strengthening our ability to make better decisions as we go through life. Because personally, I think it's a skill, and it's a skill that most of us can continue to build on and nurture throughout our whole life. I don't know that you ever master it 100% in every context of life, right? So, you just mentioned something really interesting, though, which is letting your kids make poor decisions. As a parent, how do you do that?
That's a good question, because it's incredibly counterintuitive to do that, right? And it's also really important to say there are particular places where we can let them make the bad decisions, right? Where they're going to be, for the most part, safe, right? Where the risk is relatively low. But if they make bad decisions and we let them learn from the consequences of those decisions, that's what's going to enable them to make better decisions the next time around.
Yeah. And, I hope people hear that, because I've raised teenagers myself, right? So it's not just about letting them make the bad decision, but it's about letting them feel the consequences.
That's the really important part, Karen, is letting them feel the consequences.
That's really hard, because I know as a parent, like, I've had to practically put a muzzle on myself sometimes to and to not, once, my kids made decisions that I didn't agree with, however they turned out, just go, well, I guess you learned. And not rush in to save them, which is, it's like, that's your natural inclination, is to try to save them.
And that's what I mean when I say it's counterintuitive. And the self-talk that goes along with that is, I'm saving them by giving them the opportunity to learn to save themselves.
So it's about taking what you're saying, what the voice in your head is saying to you as a parent, and it sounds like it's reframing that voice to have a different message.
That's exactly right. It's asking yourself the question of, what am I trying to teach my kid here? Right?
Yep.
I'm trying to teach them to be an independent adult in the long run. And so it's thinking of like, am I depriving my kid of the opportunity to learn from this mistake?
That is amazing. That's a beautiful way to look at it, because as parents, we all, I think, feel tremendous guilt. If you didn't keep them from making a mistake, you didn't save them from this or do that for them or make their life easier or better.
100%. Yes.
And it's so hard to not do that.
It's really hard. And we live in a culture right now that is very much not about letting our kids do those things by any stretch of the imagination. We jump in.
Yeah, we do. And it's hard not to. Let me ask you too about another part of that thought process, if you will, which is, it's not even just about us doing something that we don't feel like good parents because we're not saving our children. But then I think, is there also an element in there about, what will the neighbors think if I let my kid do this?
Oh, 100%. 100%. And because nobody really does these days, it's that much harder to be that parent who does.
So what do you tell your clients when they're like, and I don't even know if they can verbalize it, if they can admit yeah, I'm afraid of what, the rest of the teachers or the teachers or the rest of the parents in the neighborhood are going to think. What tools do you give them to help them deal with that?
So oftentimes, Karen, what I ask them to do is to go back a little bit to when they were kids. Because if you think about when we were growing up, things were so different, right?
Oh, yeah.
Come summertime, I would get up in the morning, I'd get dressed, I'd be out to play in my neighborhood 9 o'clock in the morning. My mom had no idea where I was, what I was doing. I fought with the neighbor kids. We resolved our conflicts. We climbed trees. We did all these things, right? And if you think about all of the skills that we learned being out there on our own, that's so important. And now our kids don't even have those opportunities. So I asked them to think about, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with one of your kid friends. And how did you work that out? Your mom didn't butt in and sit you down and have a conversation with the two of you by any stretch of the imagination, right?
Yeah.
So it's I think going back a little bit to how did you learn these things?
That's so interesting because I'm from the same background, so to speak. I mean, my mother would open the door. It's like, go play.
Yes.
We were gone all day long.
Uh-huh.
Go play and don't get into trouble. Like, don't do anything that I have to hear about.
Right. Yes.
I have no idea what she did all day, but it wasn't paying attention to us.
I would say the same, Karen. I have no idea what my mom did all day.
But here's the beauty. I didn't care. When I was a kid, I had my own world, my own friends. We'd run around the neighborhood. We would, raid other people's gardens in the summer to have lunch. Not a good idea. I do not recommend that. But, that was the way we lived. And we fell down, we got bruised, we got scraped up, we did whatever. And somehow or other, most of us survived.
Right. Yes, we did. We did.
So interesting. And I think that's important to understand that good decisions, the ability to make good decisions comes from having made enough bad decisions to know how this one's going to turn out.
Absolutely. And learning from the consequences of those bad decisions.
100%. Mm-hmm. I'd like to switch gears a little bit now, though, and go back into the co-parent aspect of coaching, right? So let's say you've got two parents and you're coaching the parents in the context of divorce or post-divorce, whichever. Mm-hmm. And the bad decisions that you're worried about, affecting your kids are not the ones your kids are making, but the ones your co-parent is making. How do you help people deal with that?
So I would say there are two big pieces to that. And one is, consistently reminding people, like, this is about your kids. I often will say to parents, you are no longer spouses. You are now in the business of raising your kids, right? So this is your work life. Yep. Here. You are in the business of raising your kids. So it's a consistent reminder of that. And it's about asking them to really think about what's important here. Is it important, all of this, what I like to call the emotional muck that was their marriage, right? Mm-hmm. I really strongly encourage people, you got to work through that. You got to find a therapist, or you got to find a coach, or you got to find some way to work through that emotional muck so that it doesn't get vomited all over your kids. So those are really the two pieces. It's the processing through and the remembering what's important.
That is so that you've just said gold, right? You've given people gold here, because a lot of people, they want to do what's best for their kids. They really want to put their kids first, but it's easy to forget. It's easy to get caught, as you put it, in the emotional muck. And it sounds like this could be advice, good parenting advice, whether people are getting a divorce or not, because sometimes parents have different views of parenting. So what would you say to the two parents who just fundamentally have different parenting styles?
So in my co-parent coaching, I have a sort of 8-step process that I work people through. And one of the steps is understanding different parenting styles. and understanding the pros and cons of each parenting style so that we can come to see that, kids can benefit from different parenting styles. There are pros and cons to all of them. So it's really coming for people to really understand, okay, this is not the way that you're parenting is not about me. It's about, this is your parenting style.
Interesting. And how do you deal with that though? Because I've seen so many times that one parent, it's not just that their other parent has a different style. They see the choices that the other parent is making as bad for their children, harmful to their children. How do you, and if you look at it, you kind of take yourself out of the situation and look at it objectively. It's not necessarily dangerous. It's just maybe the parents have different values. They definitely have different parenting styles. How do you, as a parent, whether you're in a divorce, getting a divorce, already divorced, or still married, how do you resolve those kinds of differences in values, in parenting styles, in a way that doesn't like have you have your heart in your throat when your kids are with their other parent?
So I always ask parents let's look at the big picture here. Are we talking about, you're different, you have different bedtimes in different homes. Are we talking about 30 minutes? Or are we talking about 3 hours? Like, let's talk about what are the fundamentals that kids need. So are your kids safe? Are they, okay, maybe with your ex, they're eating a little more junk food than you would like, but in the scheme of life, like, is that going to kill them? No. Right? Are they getting more fruits and vegetables when they're with you? Yes. So does it all balance out? Absolutely. So it's really like, let's look at the big picture and let's assess what's safe and what's not, what's safe and what's different. Because those are really different things, right? Unsafe and different are two entirely different things.
100%. And I like the way you've sort of framed that for people, because I think in our society today, people are instantly going to jump into that's not safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good for my child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, how do you work with parents so that they can start to accept that different doesn't necessarily mean unsafe or dangerous?
I think when they come to understand, okay, this is different than the way that I do it, but it's not unsafe. Like, okay, eating a little more junk food, it's not ideal, but, it's fine. Like, nobody's going to die from eating, 10 more potato chips than I would get, once they really come to really understand. And that's what I will say to people, ask yourself the question, do you feel like this is unsafe or do you feel like this is different? And then to go a little deeper, unsafe on what level? Because, I'll go back to the junk food thing again, right? No, it's not a good thing for any of us to eat too much junk food. But in the scheme of life, let's put this on a scale.
Yeah, all I can say is if I was going to die from having eaten junk food as a kid, I would not have made it to where I am today.
Neither would I. Neither would I.
But I like your focus on keeping the big picture in mind and looking at this in terms of levels of, is this just is it dangerous? Is it, how dangerous is it? Is it unsafe? Is it different? Is it, what is it? And then what tools do you give parents to help them have the discussion about this? Because I think that's where a lot of parents get sort of off track, because the discussion becomes an argument, becomes a nothing's resolved, becomes you spiral into a pattern that isn't helpful for anyone.
Mm-hmm. So I ask people to think about a couple of things. One is the price of peace. Like, it's almost like when you're raising your kids, like, is this a battle you want to take on? Right? Is this worth it to you? And if it is, okay, then I think the goal is to help the other person understand why this is particularly important to you. So again, I'll go back to the junk food thing. If in your family you have a history of obesity or cancer, so then you go to your co-parent and you say, so here's why this is really important to me. Because a co-parent's understanding of it could be, oh, you're just trying to control me. You think I'm a bad parent. You're just trying to control me. So it's the understanding of the why behind the behavior.
That is so, so important and so true, because most of the time, I mean, we're acting and reacting from our own patterns, our own pasts, our own training and upbringing and all the things, right? And it makes sense to us because we lived our life.
Right.
But what we forget is that to another person, they didn't live our life.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get it.
Mm-hmm. Right. They don't get it. And unless we help them get it, they won't.
Right. But so often we get locked in the argument or the thing that whatever it is that is the immediate problem. And it's not until you get underneath that problem that you start to be able to solve it, actually.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's so important for parents to hear. There's one thing though I wanted to talk to you about. I have a question about parent coaching versus family therapy. I know they're very different things, but can you explain how that's different? Like if a parent is in a situation where the family dynamic just isn't working, their kids are maybe teenagers and not responding well, acting out, blah, blah, blah. How do they know if they need family therapy or if they need parent coaching?
So I would say there is of course the fundamental difference between coaching and therapy, right? So as a coach, I see part of my role is to ask the questions to help people to come to understand the why. Now, if when we get to the why, there's an underlying psychological issue that's causing you more psychological issues, then I'm going to say that's probably a piece that you need to work out with a therapist. So if, the junk food thing again, if, you have family history of obesity and, cancer and those things. And so you're worried about the junk food given that, and that anxiety level becomes so intolerable to you. Now you need to go see a mental health professional to help you work through that anxiety.
That's so interesting. So that's individual therapy. At what point, like, how do people assess if their family relationship is just so toxic that it's that family relationship that needs maybe family therapy, like something bigger, right? Versus individual.
So it's a really good question, Karen. And I think we often go to family therapy when what we really need is a lot of family coaching. Because what we have found is that if we make some just really oftentimes very small shifts in language or behavior, the entire family dynamic can switch.
Tell me about that. What kinds of changes, especially the small ones, things that are very doable for people, what kind of changes in their language or their behavior, not anyone else's, but them, can shift the family dynamic?
So I had this one family that I was working with. They had a high school son, and he was a super smart kid, struggled with ADHD and anxiety. And as kids with ADHD often do, was a big procrastinator in terms of like getting his homework done and stuff. His dad would, come home from work, go into his room. Is your homework done? Is your homework done? You need to get your ass off the computer and get your homework done. Do it now. Do it now. And of course, the kid at that point is like, no, because now you've made me mad. You've basically attacked me. You've, pretty much accused me of not doing my homework. You don't know anything about what's happening for me. So if you say, go in, do a check-in, tell me how you are, tell me about your homework. Is your homework done? What's your plan for getting your homework done? Now you have a kid who's more than willing to say, yeah, I'm going to get off my computer after this game and get my homework done. That's my plan, right? It's a whole different scenario as opposed to you need to do it and you need to do it now, to which no teenager is going to respond well.
Yeah, that's true. No right? Teenager that I've ever met.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's so interesting because so many times people come to me and they say, they don't understand. They want the other person to change. They want the other parent to change, the kid to change, something. They're just like, this has nothing to do with me. It's them.
Mm-hmm. And that, I would say, Karen, is one of the hardest parts of the work that I do is getting people to understand, like, you don't actually have a bad kid. We have a kid who's stuck in a situation where we just need to shift some dynamics, and actually that was one of the things that really got me, because I am also licensed as a mental health counselor, and I did a lot of therapy, and I worked with a lot of teenagers, and I would so often find myself so frustrated. Here's, your parent coming and dropping your kid off at my office for an hour a week, thinking my kid is the problem, when actually it's a dynamic problem. And I would think, if you would just sit in my office with your kid for this hour, things could be so different. And that was what really got me started on the parent coaching.
Wow. That's really, really interesting. So now it seems like now you've shifted your work so that you're really kind of dealing with the root cause of the problem.
Yes. Yes.
Which no parent wants to admit that it's them. And I get that. I'm a parent.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's you.
Sometimes it is us. Absolutely. Yes. And, it's okay. We all make mistakes as parents.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's another thing that I think it's really important for parents to hear, because I think most of us are terrified that we're going to do something that will forever screw our kid up. Like there's
100%.
So how do you give yourself permission to fail when failing means you're failing your kid? I mean, that's just deep.
Well, so it sort of really becomes a question of, what do you do with the failure? I had this, I'll give you a really powerful example here, Karen, from my own life. I had this situation with my son. I don't even remember what the deal was, but we got into some disagreement, and he ended up getting really angry with me and really was like, I don't even know how you can call yourself a parent coach. You're a terrible parent, the whole teenage thing, right?
Oh my gosh.
And so that really was a big blow to me. And then so I, was like, okay, we need a little space here. So I walked away, and about an hour later, he came to me and he said, that was really mean. I said it only because I wanted to hurt you. And this is the funny part. And even though it is true that you've made a lot of mistakes in raising me, I know that every one of those mistakes was made with love. And I was like, yes, when you get to be a parent, we'll see you do that and not make any mistakes. But just the recognition of, like, I know that you made these mistakes because you're human, and I know that you love me, and they all came from a place of love, was huge.
That is huge. That is, I mean, and I love, he's still not letting you off the hook.
He's definitely not letting me off the hook. No.
But, I know you love me, so we're good.
We're good. We're good. Yeah.
And I think fundamentally, at the end of the day, for all of the people I know who are parents, whether, irrespective of divorce, just in life, anyone who's a parent, isn't that what it's all about? Is if your kid can feel like, I know my parents love me,
That's the most powerful thing.
Yeah.
It really, really is. And also, I would say, never underestimate the power of an apology. It's okay for you to go to your kid and say, you know what? I messed up. I shouldn't have said or done X, Y, and Z, and I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
And hear your kid out. Let them tell you, yeah, you know what? I'm really mad.
Yeah. And that's hard to hear, because it feels, maybe it is a personal attack on you.
Mm-hmm.
You did this to me or that to me. And part of it may be totally unjustified. It's just your child sees things from their perspective, not yours.
Absolutely. Yes.
But to give them the opportunity and the space where I think it's important, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that you're not defending, you're not getting into an argument with them, you're just listening.
Hearing and validating. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's beautiful. And I think there's no better place to wrap this up and end it than with that to have your kids feel loved, to feel validated, even though you are going to make mistakes as a parent, or they'll think you made mistakes, right?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
May not be objectively true, but it's a beautiful gift.
It really is.
So, Rita, thank you for the gift of having been here. This has been such a great conversation. Tell our listeners where they can find you.
So first I want to say, Karen, thank you so much for having me. This was a wonderful conversation. I would love for people to visit my website. It's www.aparentspath.com. You can also find me on social media at the same A Parent's Path, both on Facebook and on Instagram.
That's awesome. Rita, thank you again for being here. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
And for those of you out there listening, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you again on the next episode.